What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, goys and non-goys in the audience? I apologize for not posting consistently. I'm definitely going to try to improve that on my end. It has just been a doozy the past couple of weeks or so. It has been back-to-back, nonstop. So whatever that means. Really, it's just, I could say that I really was just too lazy to post. So I will try to improve that heading forward, but just to kind of dive headfirst in today's agenda here, I wanted to speak briefly about politics, and I think in a way that's going to maybe change some people's minds even on both sides. Because me personally, I don't know if you can tell by the previous episodes if you have watched, I'm kind of in the middle in certain areas. I'd say, and this is a cop-out because a lot of people say this when they're secretly a conservative person, but they don't want to let that off because there's a lot of assumptions that come along with, he's conservative, he must be this, or this. So I would say I'm more traditionally libertarian, mainly just because I detest both sides of the political spectrum in terms of their extremes. I think a lot of people kind of, if they're honest with themselves and they separate themselves from the whole pageantry of politics and whatnot, most people do lie somewhere between the two groups. Are there going to be allies that are, American flag salesmen that, do marches outside of Planned Parenthood clinics with, burning crosses or whatever on the weekends? And are there also going to be equally on the left side? Are there going to be blue-haired, transvestite, obese women, screaming and running around in furry suits, biting people, reacting like Emily Blair from The Exorcist when someone throws holy water in their general direction. On both ends, it's kind of all over the place. But again, on both ends, there's exaggerated caricatures of what that political party believes. And I think what's happened in the U.S. specifically, I can't speak too much to politics outside of the West here, but specifically within the United States, we've fractured into extremes rather than just acknowledging, this is what politics should be to me. There is the right and the left, and those are both spectrums. And the idea behind it is that, yes, being on the right or being conservative typically follows this playbook, or you typically believe these types of things. And being on the left or being to the left of that center line typically involves believing these things. But most people, if they were to really look into things, typically fall somewhere between those two spectrums. So, not saying you shouldn't identify as one of those two, but just understanding that it's very infrequently that you're going to find a politician on either end of the spectrum that's truly going to be speaking, to your best benefit, or to what you truly believe should be a focus. And those people that do have those good intentions on either side, pure intentions aren't necessarily backed by a bunch of power brokers or people that are lining their pockets and pushing certain agendas. They're going to have a harder time getting into that arena, and they're going to have an even harder time making it to a point where they're actually, a respected actual, potential candidate. And that is, unfortunately, because politics is just a dirty game. And like a lot of things, it is, unfortunately, who you know. It's a big club, and not a lot of us are a part of it. So most of us aren't a part of it, but it's a big, big club. So if you're not a part of that club, and you're just one of the plebs like me out here, you're looking at these two politicals. You're looking at these two, these two parties, and you're going, where do I fit in here? Because the way I look at it, there's two extremes on either side, or at least two. When you think of the word conservative or Republican, you think of a certain mental image. If you were to give a stereotype, kind of like how if someone on the right were to hear, or someone who was typically right-leaning were to hear liberal or left-leaning or libtard or something, what they would think of on the right side towards the liberal would be the blue-haired, screaming, screeching person. Or, on the other side, the fake intellectual. When they're thinking about stereotypes, right? Either the outward insane person that doesn't understand their own gender and is, being crazy and screaming at people and whatnot, and biting things and destroying artwork. These are the extreme. These are the extreme situations we're pointing to. Not the rule isn't the or the exception isn't the rule here, or vice versa, whatever it is. But there's that type of liberal, and then there's the other type of liberal people think of, which is the fart sniffer that would have been referenced on the South Park episode when they were in San Francisco. And I don't know if you guys remember this. Kyle's dad had gotten a Prius, and he was so proud of himself he started sniffing his farts, and he ended up moving from South Park over to San Francisco to be around a more enlightened crew. So those are the two types of leftists that people typically think of, is the super elite, like very rich, wealthy leftists that are, simultaneously holding incredibly hypocritical views that are directly at odds with how they live their normal day-to-day lives, but don't really care about their own hypocrisy because their parents are, got them a job at Newsfeed, and they're like the senior vice editor of Newsfeed at 25 because their father, he's like the, executive at Goldman Sachs or something. So those are the two types of people typically think about when they're considering leftists in their head. And then on the other side of the spectrum, the two types of conservatives people think about are Republicans, is either the, fat cat, like slightly obese to morbidly obese, balding guy in a nice giant suit, sitting back Jurassic Park style, I forgot what the character's name was, but he was like, see, no one cares. Just like talking out in public about screwing people out of money, misappropriating stocks and funds, stealing from people in legal ways. That's what they think about on one end of the spectrum, is essentially the white collar criminal, or the person that, thinks they're above poor people. That's one of the versions of conservatives that people think of. And then the other extreme version is the, I don't take nothing for nobody. I'm out in the fields about 90 to 60 hours a day, just shucking corn and riding horses. That's what people think of, the liberals. They think of the most inbred, like when a true city liberal that's never left New York or never left their little borough in Queens or whatever, thinks about an Iowa farmer or like a true farmer. What they think of is the, Deliverance style, playing a banjo on the back porch, making out with his cousin with 3 teeth missing on. It's going to be if the God willing, it's going to be a good harvest this year. That's what they think about. God willing, it's going to be a good harvest. What are we growing again? Corn? That's what they think about. That or the white-collar criminal. And then on the left side, like we were speaking about, it's either the entitled, hypocritical, wealthy, elitist leftist, or the alternative, just a mentally ill person. Just a mentally ill person who's like screaming, doesn't understand their own gender, and like bites people. Okay? And obviously, by the way, if anyone's triggered from hearing that or upset, it's a joke. It's just a generalization. The rule is not the exception, and vice versa. The exception is not the rule here. I'm not saying everyone's that way. I'm just speaking purely to, based in reality, what people on either side think of when they think of the opposition, right, generally. And there needs to be, the reason I bring that all up is because most people don't fall into those two groups. Most people do not fall into those two groups, okay, of the extremes on either end. There's plenty of conservative. You'll find a conservative guy probably just working at some, Toys R Us somewhere, working another job at Target, door dashing on the side, and just goes, I'd prefer to have a smaller government. And then you'll find, but I also don't really care what, this group of people are doing or what I just don't really care about this conservative thing, but I prefer they're, fiscally conservative but not socially libertarian, and vice versa. You'll find some people that are, fiscally libertarian or, more laissez-faire fiscally, but more socially conservative. You know what I mean? There's going to be a fair mix in there. And that's where most people are, is kind of just individuals. If they actually know what they're talking about and actually understand the issues at hand and what they're discussing, then they're going to generally have views that fall into both categories. And then there's separate categories on either side of people that are purposefully disingenuous and people that will just toe the whether it's the party line or the group line, regardless of where they go with it or what they do, just because most people are very terrified of losing their position. It's a big fear of most people in life, is losing their position of power, losing authority within a group structure, because that's where most people get their value in life. It's from groups. So you're going to have those people as well on either side, Republican and left-leaning side, that just they'll hold on to their group identity with if they had 8 hands, they would hold on to it with 10. That's how aggressive they would be, because they just don't want to lose it, because it's a sense of security to be a Republican or a liberal, whatever it is. People treat it like sports teams. It's like how Jets fans will, once every year you hear a crazy story about some fan just like beating someone to death outside of a stadium over like a corn dog or something, and it's like, well, yeah, I mean, that's going to happen at some point, but it doesn't mean all fans are going in there bloodthirsty. It doesn't mean like just because that happens once every 2 years doesn't mean Karen Fitzgerald from Southern Idaho is going to like some hockey game and just planning to like hurt people. That's not how that works. So just because, again, just like that weirdo kid shot at Trump when he was speaking doesn't mean everybody is that weird where they feel the need to hurt people physically for having different ideas. So not everyone's that much of a psycho. The same thing can be said for people who shoot at liberals. It's insane. You probably shouldn't do that. It's there's a lot of reasons you shouldn't do that, right? But I say all that to say this, right? People get really confused when they come into especially U.S. politics because there's a lot of what's the word? There's a lot of what's the opposite of optimism? Pessimism. There's a lot of pessimism, and it's starting younger and younger. That's how you know the sign of a sick society is when like the pessimists are kids that are like 10 to 11 years old. Like I was reading some memes from one of my cousins that's like 11, 12 that he was like custom making with his boys, and I go, this is stuff even I wasn't thinking about back when I was like around his age. And I was a pretty sick puppy. Like I thought I was a memer and I was like dark and edgy. These kids are aware of like dark concepts at a very young age now. At around 9 or 10, you could probably have, with one of these new kids in the new generation, you could probably have a deeper conversation about death and the meaning of life and the lack thereof through memes than you could with any of these 40 to 50 or the boomers out there that are, too busy farting away all the funds they collected over the past 20 to 30 years or so to actually parent their kids. So it's like you're going to have more of a. I'm all over the place, but the point is, and all that didn't really mean anything. But the point is, you're going to get these kids are a reflection of the society, which is just general pessimism and black pill in its essence. It's like, well, they both suck, so who cares? And I think that's the understanding most people are under is, well, both these sides are not for me. And again, we're keeping particular candidates out of this because I'm not going to speak about anybody let anyone know necessarily in this podcast who I voted for, what my views are. I'm just speaking in general about politics in the United States. And most people already are pessimistic here. And it's getting younger and younger. Every year, kids a year younger are starting to get into like the edgy memes and the everything's meaningless, nothing matters. So it's like what happens in that situation where you have just so much pessimism and so many people going, well, who cares? We have to do this every 4 years. It's like a chore. It's not something we're even excited for anymore. It's because the illusion has fallen away. The veil is lifted, or the veil, whatever it is. Veal is a baby cow, right? Or baby calf, whatever it is, gross. The veil has lifted. Where now people can see. They can see the guy behind the curtain in Wizard of Oz. They can see the Green Prince or the Green King just pulling the levers. They understand that it makes very little difference who they vote for because ultimately what these actions of these candidates will be is what is in line with their donors or what is in line with the company message or the party message. It's not going to be their own independent thoughts because it is impossible, the way the system is set up currently, for somebody to independently run without being funded to a degree where they would need Musk money to do it. Okay? It's almost impossible in every sense of the word for somebody who isn't a billionaire to independently run, which is insane. Like, that's the most insane part. And people do mention it, but it's heavily glossed over nowadays. Think about how crazy it is that anyone can run. It doesn't mean anyone can win. And I would love someone to chat GPT this, like how much is the average. I can't be bothered with it because I'm lazy. But if someone in the audience that doesn't exist could chat GPT how much money roughly it costs to fully, put out a presidential campaign and fund that and pay everybody that's involved with it and all the advertising. And then there's like a 95% chance on top of that you're just going to lose all that money. And the only thing you technically gain in a situation like that is, well, at least I got my name out there. And I've heard this, like read like an article or a Reddit post about how after people get out of these presidential campaigns spending this lucrative amount of money, they actually build, like, part of the reason they want to do it is because it builds their credibility, it builds their brand or their name. So they look at it as like an investment. Because think about it this way: if you land like 8th in a presidential race and there's like 16 candidates, or like a big time race, it's still going to be a big news. Like, oh, eighth, wow! So you beat out 7 to 8 other people. So it's still impressive, and it helps you out professionally probably, but that's not the point. It's like it shouldn't be that way, and that's what most of the professional world is in the United States. Is people? It's who you know, whose pockets you can grease. And this isn't meant to be pessimistic. It's just realistic. This is what I've seen both in the professional world and just in, any other area of life. It's like who you know, the money you have to be able to do it, and people will lie and lie and lie. But that's pretty much the way to get it. Is you think people in politics have been established there for 20 to 30 years, want somebody coming in who's just has no prior connections. That's what happened with Trump, and that's why they hated him so much. They'll lie to themselves about what the real reason was, because in my opinion, my belief is that they're nervous that someone outside the system is coming in and is almost entirely dejecting the one world order. I'm not just start going off the deep end with conspiracies. No, but I got my own theories. I think the only reason a political candidate would be, and this is the most attacked a political candidate has ever been, in my opinion. From what I've read, and I'm pretty well versed, at least in presidents wise. Other than him, Lincoln, a few other people, Barack to a certain level, but nobody to this level was attacked this crazy before coming into office. This crazily, where it tried to put him in jail, tried to silence him, tried to sue him, so many attacks. And to me, that's because there's fear there. And when you set up a system where the only way you can run and effectively win is if you know a bunch of people, is if you're very well established in that club or in that group or just around those people, and if you have the funds to be able to get yourself into a place where you can advertise and do all that stuff and actually become a threat financially, which is very, very rare. Those types of people that are both willing to do those two things that he's willing to do, which is have enemies by having political opinions that differ from the vast majority in corporations, which is essentially what both Republicans and liberals and people left leaning, the line they push nowadays is basically, well, what's going to bring in more war and what's going to make these corporations that own me more money? Well, do whatever they're going to do. And when someone comes in who is not completely independent but does not rely on the level of borrowed wealth from other people to make these decisions and to do these things, it scares the you-know-what out of the people in these positions that have been installed and kept in those positions for 20 to 30 years, that know they're inadequate, know they're not doing the job properly, they know they're being corrupt, they know they're stealing money, they know they're misappropriating, they know they're pushing, you know what I mean? They know they're scam artists. The system's broken, they're aware it is, and the reason they allowed it is because they benefit from it financially. Imagine being in a tight-knit grip of 100 people, right? And there's this movie scene, I forgot what it was, but it was from a 1930s, 1940s black and white movie. And it was this big venture capitalist, building, guy who owned a bunch of, business buildings or whatever. And he's going up the elevator, and he's looking down. The guy's asking him all these questions about the morality of his business decisions. And they're at the 60th or 70th level of this massive megalith this guy built. And he looks down and he goes, take before I answer that question, take a look down. And I forgot what movie this is, I'm probably butchering it. And he goes, what do they look like to you? And he goes, I don't know, from this height they look like ants. And he goes, exactly. And that's such a clever way to summarize how the uber wealthy must view the world, which is, it's like asking, well, do you care about John Rickenstead? From how much do you care? Do you want to give $20 of your wealth to save John Rickenstead over in New Zealand, in the most isolated part of New Zealand? His sheep just lost its front leg, it just broke its front leg, and now he's not going to be able to cart his corn from his shack. You'd be like, well, not this week, because again, if it's not, I forgot where I was going with that. I probably just went on a separate rant, but you get the point. It's why bother? And that's where most people are at mentally, that are aware of, to loop this all together, all these completely disjointed thoughts. That's how most people look at politics nowadays. And honestly, how most people around that kid's age that I mentioned earlier today, how they view most of life is just, well, I have to do it, right? And that's a big change. Even though it doesn't seem like it, that's a big change. Even from a few generations ago, where people did not have it necessarily as good, but they were happier. And it's because most people on a base level understand that things are screwed up across the board, right? if you were to really, it doesn't take a lot of research to understand. It's just like having a basic understanding of how people operate, and especially with how power gets to people's heads. It's very easy to understand how a group of think about it that way, like the example earlier, 100 to 200 people get together and they go, well, we could make a substantial, an ungodly amount of money, and and just hoard that between the 100 to 200s of us, and they would be none the wiser, and things would look like on the outside they were still moving along ever so swiftly and ever so nicely. Little would they and again, these people on the outside who don't have access to these conversations and this information, or would be stopped from gathering that information or access, would be none the wiser. So these people in these limited, tight groups, with this power and with this influence to change all these and do all this stuff, of course they're not going to want to leave. It's probably intoxicating. If you're 50, 60 years old and most people's lives were just busting their you-know-what until they get into a position where they could make someone else feel how they felt on the way up. So most people that get into management or get into higher positions, they remember it's still there's an aftertaste in their mouth from how they were treated coming up the corporate ladder or coming up that power structure. So they want to flex a little bit of that onto the people beneath them. It's a natural impulse to have, right? So those people that make it to a position where they're almost, it's crazy to say, but almost unionized politicians, right? Where it's impossible to get rid of them. They've been there for, it happens, what was it, in Congress or something? It happens all the time where it's these people have been there for 20 to 30 years and you're going, can we get someone whose teeth aren't falling out of their mouth to do this job properly? There's got to be some dude from the Bronx who's 30 years old who could come in there, hell, anywhere, but who could come into that position and do it better than someone like Pelosi, right? Or any of these individuals that you hear them talking, and I understand, don't talk down on elders and people who are older, because there's plenty of coherent older people, but there's also people that are older that are not coherent, right? And I don't understand why we can't call out reality. It's it might hurt her feelings or it might not feel good, but these are people that get paid from taxpayer dollars, if I understand it correctly, to make life-altering decisions for millions of people. And they just get to sit on the unearned wealth of other people and sit into these almost I don't even know how to describe it. It's I don't even know how to explain it. Basically, what I'm getting at is they shouldn't be able to bogart that position forever. And the reason they get into that position where they could bogart it for themselves and for their friends, and it just ends up stacking it for their own benefit, is because I think the rule should be changed so that's not possible. I think term limits should be tightened up. But other than that, I think it's just because, again, the club mentality. If you're cool with those people, you're cool with this person. If you're cool with this person, you're cool with this person. If you're not cool with this person, you're not cool with this person. So very few people people outside of politics might be willing to mix and match, but the people in those groups are almost never willing on any occasion to bend or mold or shift their view for the benefit of the collective, if that makes sense. Because they're so bought and sold by that group that they almost start to not care about the little people. Like the allegory I used with that 30s, 40s black and white movie with the building manager going up and saying, they all look like ants from up here, don't they? And it's that mentality with these people. Could you imagine, most people only interact with the people in their job, their family, their friends, and just people out and about. So not too many people, probably a couple handfuls every week, right? Unless you're really out there. These people in these Congress, Senate, just government in general, they're highfalutin. And the people they associate with are going to be other powerful people. So they're almost never going to be rubbing elbows with actual Americans or actual people on a day-to-day basis. And that also additionally leads to this feeling of superiority and being well, they'll wait for us to make a decision and we'll be happy about it. We hold the power of balance in our hands, and they'll be okay with it because they have to be. And that begs the question from us, and this isn't me going we should do something about it. I'm just saying, at what point do we look at this and go, well, this is not what we signed up for. They're gouging us, making it almost impossible to choose a good candidate because both are bought and sold and paid for. The one bright light there, and this is the reason I lean towards Trump, and I got to be honest, I do like him, is because he's the only one who has lost money being a president as well. And this is the stuff they don't discuss. He's not a perfect guy, I don't think he's like, I think there's obviously people that would potentially be more qualified to do it, just like any other job. But what I like about him is his ability to, his ability basically to disagree with people and just like let people hate him, which is an important skill because as a leader, people are going to hate you regardless. You should be more worried about a leader that's worried about being loved all the time than you should be worried about a guy who's actually willing to make some enemies, because at least you know he's legitimate. A lot of these politicians, like the Hillary Clintons and the George Bushes, and on both sides, Republicans and liberals, they're bought and sold and paid for by anybody that can get them into that position, or the people that groomed them to get into that position. So they're never really candidates. They're a team. You got a team. That's why people used to joke about, oh, well, it's not Biden up there, it's Obama, because it's probably likely true. These people are in teams, just like Republicans are in teams. You're not voting for the guy, you're voting for the party, more so. So that's where we're at nowadays. Rather than voting for the individual attached to the party, you're voting for the party attached to an individual. And it's not good. Okay? And this was like all over the place. Didn't make too much sense, but again, I hope this kind of sums it up for some people, because I was listening to this, no joke, I think he's 11 or 12 years old, my cousin give his unfiltered perspective on politics and just like culture as a whole and just kind of, with the direction he believes personally the world is going. And hear this like 11, 12-year-old kid just start the doomer memes and like, oh, we're cooked. Yeah, it's over. Could you imagine having that perspective at 11 years old? When I was 11 years old, there was still a light in my eyes, right? There was still wind at my heels, right? Could you imagine being that, like, well, we're done at 11 years old? It's tough. So it's very, very tough. But it's just an insight. And again, that's a reflection of the world. That's not a reflection on these kids being broken or, pessimistic. It's a reflection of how screwed up the world is. That these young kids who are hyper aware, by the way, because as much as people like to pass off onto kids that they're very unintelligent and immature, they are, but they're also very, very intuitive because they're more tapped in. That's a separate video, but I believe kids to be more tapped into pure, authentic, energy than adults. Because as we get older, separate video, as we get older, I believe we just get knocked down too much by life, and we forget what it's like to view things from like an unfiltered perspective. Right, and that's what a kid offers, is unfiltered, which I like to think I do here too. So, big kid, huh? But again, this is Mark from the White Grape Podcast. I will be. This isn't necessarily a threat, but if you don't like, subscribe, share this podcast everywhere, every single place I decide to post it. I don't even know where I'm going to post it besides YouTube. Probably a lot of places. But if you don't like, share, subscribe, and tell everybody about this, I want you to tuck in your daughter or son tonight, and the first thing you do before you go to bed, before you turn off that light, just tell them, hey, I want you, as soon as you get up, log on to that family computer downstairs, if people still have those, sign into YouTube, into your account, or create an account before school, and subscribe to this kid's channel, because if you don't, he won't do as well. So no threat, just saying it would help me out considerably if people were to support this channel. So do it, or I'll kill you. In Minecraft or some other game where you can do that without repercussions. So again, that wasn't a death threat, and this has been Mark from the White Grape Podcast. Those are sirens in the background. Good to see you. We'll talk soon. And I plan to post again Mondays, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. No particular time. Bye-bye.